It is my great honor. I feel like I've known him, and yet we've only known each other a couple of weeks. So it is great pleasure. I introduce you to Sam Pollard, who currently, in addition to everything else, is at NYU Tisch School teaching editing. I can give you a list of gazillion things that he has done, between documentary producer, film, TV, video editor, executive producer. He's done, I haven't seen this one, but Dateline Israel, a film series on the history of Israel. We may have to bring that back to Dutchess to see what it is. I learned that he edited 3-2-1 Contact, which was like my generation. So thank you for making my childhood so impactful. And there's another one that I think we may have to bring here and that I would love to just touch upon later. In 2019, a 6-part series on why we hate. And I was listening to the NPR interview, and it just seems to touch upon so many relevant things still today. But you've won a number of Emmys, 2020, the Peabody Career Achievement Award, Oscar nominated, worked with Spike Lee, edited Spike Lee stuff, done stuff with Steven Spielberg. You, though, have directed an amazing Sammy Davis Jr., I Gotta Be Me. So I think that's a lot all in one short breath. Starting, is there anything you'd like to say, and I'll shut up?
I want to thank you for having me, Karen. I really appreciate you showing the film. I really treasure that film a lot, and I'm glad people have gotten to see it. I was very fortunate to be able to take that film, I guess almost 3 years ago, to Haifa.
Oh.
I showed at the Haifa Film Festival to a couple of, standing room only audiences. It really went over really well. So I'm glad you showed it. It's a really very powerful film. I think it really gives you a really layered and complex perspective on Sammy Davis Jr.
I was speaking to other people and learned so much about, it was interesting. I was even talking to my 19-year-old son, who I think saw the film. And he said, yeah, well, that was when the time that Rat Pack, they were being like outwardly racist and joking, and everybody just pretended it was okay. And if you watch some of those clips, it's like, you can't say those things nowadays.
No, not anymore. But you remember back then, what was interesting is because Sammy had been, invited into the Rat Pack, and Sinatra and Dean, on one level, they loved Sammy Davis Jr., but also they were also tone deaf because of the time. So when they made these jokes about Sammy, about being Black or Kemosabe, Native Americans, I mean, it was a different world. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Karen, I guess I was 13, 14, 15 when I saw some of these routines. I think I laughed. It took until I was an adult to understand, oh, that's kind of not nice what you're saying, Frank to Sammy. I was a big Sammy Davis Jr. fan when I was a teenager. I used to see him on the Ed Sullivan Show, on Hollywood Palace. I had seen all the Rat Pack movies, Ocean's 11, Sergeant's 3, Robin and the Seven Hoods. And I was a huge Sammy Davis fan. And I had, even at 16 in 1966, read his biography, Yes, I Can, where he really detailed all the stuff that he had to go through that we talk about in the film, how he was treated in the Army, how he was treated, how he felt very sensitive about listening to the way Sammy and Frank and Dean would make jokes about him. It really got under his skin. His relationship with My Brit, the tragedy of that relationship, losing his eye. This man, like all of us, we have complex lives, but Sammy was a star. So it was front and center for many people. We all saw it. So I was very happy to be able to direct this film. Initially, I wasn't the original director. I was going to just edit the film for another director who was a colleague of mine. And he had some personal issues coming about that he couldn't direct it anymore. So the executive producer of American Masters, Michael Cantor, asked me to direct. And I said, sure, I would love to do it. Because I was a big fan of Sammy Davis Jr., a huge fan.
Yeah.
It was a real honor for me to do it.
He was such a groundbreaker on so many levels. And I mean, certain things that went in his interviews, when he said, the Army situation, when he, he would get peed on, urinated on, and, and then when he beat the guy up, the guy's like, yeah, you may have won this one, but you always be the,
You're
the
still a
end
nigger.
champion.
You're still a nigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah.
just, that was, for him, it seemed like that was the epiphany of, okay, we got to do something different, because, the hardships of it. I did, and maybe it was inappropriate to laugh, but when he made his own joke of like, yeah, I'm black, I'm Jewish, and I clear out a whole neighborhood all by myself,
That's right.
It's like,
That's right.
yeah, those
Because
were the
he was half Puerto Rican too,
Oh, and half Puerto Rican, right?
Yeah, because
So
his mother was Puerto Rican.
he cleaned out
Puerto
the whole thing. It and the when he was in the play, and he was probably maybe he was one of the first Black actors to kiss a white woman,
He
and
was. He
that
was.
was
Golden Boy. It was a huge thing. It was a huge thing when he did that, And Sammy, I mean, think about it this way. Here's a man who was living in America at the height of segregation, where if you were in the South, you had to ride in the back of the bus or the back of the train. You couldn't go into certain restaurants. You were in a segregated army when he joined the service during World War II. Even in the clubs that he played in Vegas, he couldn't go into the front door.
right. Well, and they said they had to like stay at hotels like a mile
in the Black part of town. I mean, this is a very sort of complicated life, and none of us nowadays really know what these people went through, what Black people went through in these times. I mean, I heard some stories from my dad, who was around Sammy's age, and he told me some of the same stories that he had to deal with because he grew up in Mississippi. So it's amazing. One of your questions, though, asks, did Sammy, at a young age, did he take lessons? The answer is no. Sammy never took any lessons. This guy was an instinctual learner. He learned how to mimic. He learned how to tap dance, watching his uncle and his father dance, and watching people like Bill Robinson. He learned how to sing, listening to Bing Crosby and to Frank Sinatra. He was a big Frank Sinatra fan. He learned how to act because he absorbed everything. I mean, when you listen to Sammy talk, sometimes he sounds like Ronald Colman, for those who may not remember Ronald Colman. He was a great American actor, English actor, but played in American films in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, And Sammy was so articulate in how he spoke and how he pronounced things. And this is a man, as you know in the film, only had a couple of years in elementary school. I mean, no education, but he was a voracious reader. He read everything. He watched movies all the time. So, he was a very proactive man and extremely talented, and he could learn anything by watching somebody else do it. I mean, amazing, multi-talented human being. And what's fascinating about, though, Karen, is when you think about the Rat Pack, he had more talent than those other three guys on the stage. He could sing, he could tell jokes, he could act. I mean, Sinatra could only sing and act when he wanted to.
Right.
Dean could sing.
He could do voices.
He could mimic. Yes. Sammy was a genius talent.
Yeah. And it seemed like it was more than just the superficial. I mean, Jerry Lewis, when the accident happened, was there. It seemed to be, I mean, not that in terms of, but when Frank Sinatra and the JFK thing happened, did he ever learn really why all of a sudden he was turned against?
Yeah, listen, I think, as you may not know this, because I worked on another documentary a few years before this one about Sinatra, a 4-hour documentary that I edited for Alex Gibney about Frank Sinatra. And Sinatra, he was what's the word I'm looking for? He was mesmerized by John Kennedy. His good looks, first Irish American president. He wanted to be, in the circle. And one of the reasons that he let Peter Lawford be a part of Rat Pack is because of Peter Lawford's connection to the Kennedy clan, because Peter Lawford was married to, John Kennedy's sister. So for Frank, this was like a major, badge of honor for him to be like asked to run the inauguration parties for JFK, and then being told that he couldn't have Sammy come because Sammy had this white, Nordic looking white wife. and then had to tell Sammy that he couldn't come to the inaugural ball. It devastated Sammy, it devastated him, because this was his man. I mean, he loved Sinatra like a father.
Yeah.
A big brother and a father. He loved Sinatra. For Sinatra to do this to him, but Sinatra was so enamored with Kennedy, that's what he did. But the thing to remember, people, and I think this is in the film, Harry Belafonte was invited.
Yeah.
His wife was white too, but she didn't look like she was white. If you go back and look at Harry's wife, she looked like she was a person of color. Where my Brit and Sammy is like, whoa, this tall Nordic blonde bombshell and this short black man.
Just what wasn't happening. Did their relationship get past that? And if it was in the film, I apologize for not.
Yeah, it did, but they always had, like some of us with people that we love, this. There's ups and downs.
Right.
So for example, we didn't put this in the film, but in 1959, Frank Sinatra was going to do a war film called Never So Few. And he had cast Sammy to play a character in the film. And then right around before the film was starting to shoot, Sammy did a radio show or something. And somebody asked him about his relationship with Sinatra. And he said some disparaging things about Frank, some not so nice things about Frank. When Frank heard this, Frank axed Sammy from the movie. Mm. And you know who replaced Sammy in that movie? Steve McQueen. That was a big break for Steve McQueen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So they had ups and downs. After the Kennedy brouhaha, they patched it up. And then a few years, maybe about 10 or 12 years before Sammy died, him and Sinatra had a big fallout because around that time, Sammy was doing a lot of drugs. And Sinatra thought that was, even though he was an alcohol guy, drugs was like anathema. Oh my God, you can drink, but drugs you can't do. So he stopped talking to Sammy for a while. It was a complex relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if we're talking sort of the politics of Kennedy, and then you had Nixon, mm-hmm. I didn't get the sense that was from what and share with us more about that relationship of why what he saw in line with Nixon. Was it based on his political views or just an opportunity to be close, in your opinion?
Here's the thing about Sammy Davis Jr. This guy wanted to be loved. Mm. Lots of entertainers want to be loved, right? His way of showing love was to embrace people, always to embrace, to hug, to kiss, to embrace, So when he was in Florida at the convention, Republican convention, he was asked to perform for Nixon. Sammy decided to do it. But when Nixon came out there, it was instinct. It wasn't like Sammy was a Republican, because he wasn't. It was just instinct that as soon as he saw Nixon, give him a hug.
Got it.
And as you heard him tell the gentleman on the show, it was the worst thing he ever did.
Yeah.
The worst thing he ever did. Because imagine if he had hugged Richard Nixon in today's Facebook and Twitter world.
Yeah.
Ooh. And he got lambasted for that back in 1972.
Yeah.
Woo. And he regretted it because, Black people, basically said, how could you do that? Right. And you saw that piece when he was at Operation Breadbasket. And the audience booed him, and Jesse Jackson basically had to say, give him a break. And he said, if you want me to sing, I'll sing. And he sang. And he always knew, like the fight he had with that soldier, he knew that his talent could trump any negative stuff that he had to confront.
And his personal life, it's interesting how you say, a number of us love to be loved, and I'm a hugger, so that I could understand just going to the hug. But I got the sense that his relationship with his family didn't pan out so well, especially with his wife leaving. Was it did he continue a relationship with his children? I got the sense that they didn't. They kind of distanced themselves from that.
I don't think they distanced themselves. He was a man. He was selfish. Simple as that. It was about Sammy Davis Jr. Oh, and oh, by the way, I have some wife. I had 3 kids, but it's always about Sammy Davis Jr. And my Brit got basically tired of that. He was always front and center. He had to go be in Golden Boy. He had to do Man Called Adam. He had to have his own television show. He never spent enough time with his family. And like all of us who go through these things, as he got older and he got a little, more sedentary and more introspective, he wanted to spend more time with his kids. I mean, there's a book that his daughter wrote about her relationship with her father that, was strained, and then it got close. Because, what happens with people when you sometimes aren't close with your parents or your children, and all of a sudden you start to get older and you reach out, and sometimes they're there for you, as we all know. Sometimes they say, you treated me terribly, so stay away. But, he was able to mend it with his daughter. I'm not sure about with his son, his sons, but he was a tricky guy. I mean, he was all about Sammy Davis Jr. He was in the limelight. He wanted to be in the limelight all the time, and he loved my Brit. My Brit loved him. I mean, I reached out to his daughter about doing an interview, and I said, if you come, could you bring your mother? Because my Brit's still alive. And we tried to do it in California. It didn't work out. And she lives in, his daughter lives in Tracy. She lives in Memphis, in Tennessee. So then she said, well, why don't you come to Tennessee and I'll do an interview there. So I hired a crew in Memphis to drive to, I think she was in Nashville. And I flew to Nashville, and we were going to shoot in this old railroad station. This railroad station had been an old hotel that they had refurbished. We set up the shots, we set up the lights, brought in makeup for her because she wanted makeup. And she was supposed to come at like 12:30, something like that, Karen. 12:30 comes, there's no Tracy. I call her phone, I said, are you on your way? I just got voicemail. 12:30, 12:50, I call again, no Tracy. I send the PA who I hired in Nashville to drive to Tracy's house to see if she can help her, if there's a problem, to help drive her here. She gets to, I think Tracy lived in one of those gated communities. You had to buzz in. The PA gets to the gated community. She buzzes Tracy's apartment, no answer. We wait 2.5 hours, Karen. She never showed up. And to this day, she's never responded to any emails I sent afterward or phone calls. I don't even know if I know she must have seen the film, but there's never been any response from Tracy Davis. It's bizarre.
It's bizarre and rude. I mean, if you change your mind, you don't want to do it, at least have the courtesy to say.
That's right. But it could go back to
someone should talk to her.
But it can go back to the complex relationship she had with her father.
Yeah.
And there's another question from Stan Cooper. As the film director, what was the message or messages you want to make? Well, one of the things that I'm strongly a believer in now as a documentary filmmaker, when I'm tackling subjects like about people like Sammy Davis Jr. or August Wilson, or even my present film, MLK FBI, is I like to sort of dig into the complexity of it. I'm not trying to create hagiography. I'm not trying to say Sammy is so wonderful. He's this. He was just so great. Love him, love him, love him. I want you to be able to dig into. I want to dig into his life and see that it was complex, both on a professional level, on a personal level. I want you to come away thinking, "Wow, he was a great entertainer. Man, his life was a little sort of messed up," because everybody's life is kind of messed up. It just depends on degree. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Degree. I mean, you're talking to me, and you probably think, "Oh, his life's pretty decent." Yeah, but there's been some messed up stuff in my life.
Yeah.
Sam
was just telling us that Tracy died in 2020. So I guess we can't ask her why she never showed anymore.
She died? Tracy Davis died? What?
That's what Stan just shared with us.
What? Oh, Jesus. Why not? Wow. She died in 2020. Oh my God.
Hope it wasn't from
Oh,
COVID.
oh man.
Yep.
Oh,
After a short illness, she died in November 2020.
oh my God.
Oh, sorry to break the news to you.
Oh yeah. Wow. Wow. I didn't even know that. Wow.
Does
Wow.
she have kids? Maybe her kids could answer why she
I
never
did.
got back.
She had a daughter, I think.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, and the book that I read was Sammy Davis Jr., My Father.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's like, wow, you got me that one. Wow.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Um, well, when making and trying to find this right balance of, sharing the good, the bad, the ugly, what would you say is the most two-part, the most challenging part of it and the most, wow, I had no idea, that is so fascinating to have learned with this movie?
The challenging part with every documentary, every film, is you're trying to figure out how to tell story and
Mm,
try to make it compelling and engaging, you know. And hopefully, if you find a good subject and you find good people to talk about this person, and you find an angle to the story that's really refreshing and new, that helps you tell an engaging story. That's what
mm.
I'm always looking for, you know. And then, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Either the most rewarding or the holy
Oh,
mackerel, I had no
a
idea.
couple of surprising things for me, even as I thought I knew everything about Sammy. There's a scene in the film where he's dancing, tap dancing to this old 1950s kinescope,
Oh,
and
when he was like
he's
3 years old or something.
no, he's
Oh,
older.
nothing.
He was just dancing. Oh, he was dancing with a drummer. The drummer
Oh,
was playing.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's absolutely precious. I was so wowed by him. And I had seen him dance a lot, but I was just like knocked out at the elegance of it. You know, I mean, the combination of being a Bill Robinson and a Fred Astaire. Wow, it
Yeah.
just knocked me out. He's just extraordinary. And you know, I think for me, another kind of wow moment was to see how conflicted he was about what it meant to be a black man in America and all the changes he went through during the civil rights thing with Doc. His reluctance to initially go south when Harry Belafonte wanted to go down to Alabama, you know, his embracing, you know, the notion of black power, you know, he struggled with his sense of identity all the time. You know, those things always, to me, they're eye openers. It gives you insight into a human being. And the
Mm.
thing that we had that was real treasure, we had all these audio tapes that Sammy had done for his book, Yes, I Can. You know, he was giving you some insights into who he was, how he thought, because he's a very introspective guy, really. I mean, all about himself, he was, he could really think about himself a lot, you
Mm.
know. So fascinating, fascinating man.
Yeah. It was interesting because I knew he was Jewish, but I didn't know, I never researched it or really looked into it, but it was like after such a tragedy, he was almost like, this is where I needed to be. This rabbi came to the hospital and this was right for me.
That's
And
right.
which was
And
just,
that was another thing I didn't know too, because when I did the Sinatra film, the story that we always were told about the accident was that after he had the accident and lost the eye, Sinatra was at his side. I never knew Jerry Lewis was at his side until we interviewed Jerry Lewis.
yeah.
You know, when Jerry Lewis said he got his plane, he went to a Sammy's side. That I never knew. That was a revelation for me. And I thought, quite honestly, Jerry Lewis was one of the few times he wasn't all about Jerry Lewis in an
Mm.
interview. He was about Sammy. He really loved Sammy Davis Jr.
And so I found that relationship to be very telling and almost closer than the Frank Sinatra and Sammy relationship, which I mean, just from, you saw his pain, Jerry Lewis's pain of what Sammy was going through. And so I thought that was a really, really touching part of that
Oh yeah,
relationship.
you could see that Jerry loved him.
Yeah.
Jerry loved him. So the other question here is, how many wives did Sammy have? 3. He married the first wife he married because he was afraid he was going to be hurt because he was supposedly involved with Kim Novak, which she denies. you know, so he found this woman who was a nightclub performer, and he married her. just so he would save himself from being hurt by Harry Cohen's mobsters. Second wife was my Brit, who he met when she was doing a remake of the Marlene Dietrich film, The Blue Angel. She was doing her version of it with Kurt Jurgens. I don't know if you remember Kurt Jurgens, the German actor. And he fell in love with her, seeing her at 20th Century Fox. So he was doing Porgy and Bess.
Ah, I've heard of that
he
one.
was doing Porgy and Bess. And then his third wife was Alto Vis, not Althea, Alto Vis. And she was a dancer. And she had been in Golden Boy. And he was involved with her and another dancer in the show. And he made up his mind to go with Alto Vis. And he ended up marrying Alto Vis, and he married her. He lived with her till the end of his life.
Which was not a very long life. And you know, at the end, when you put, it seems like, oh, he must have lived forever and ever. And you're like, I think it was 64.
Did he live that long? Did he live that long? Was he 64? I think that's all he was.
And I just remember going, wait, that's not old at all. That's.
But you know, back then that was old.
Yes, true.
You know, my father was 66 when he died. I thought he was an old man, and I'm 71. And,
so you're young.
And you're young. I'm a young 71.
I would thought also when he kind of knew the end of his life was sort of coming, that was the awards ceremony. And I think it was Greg Peck who came over and said, I got the shoes.
Gregory Hines.
Gregory Hines. Yes. And I want to like go back and watch that dancing scene.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
It was like he was transformed, and it seemed like he was completely, totally young and there. And
he was invigorated. I mean, just being the entertainer that he was, going back to his roots, tap dancing. And you're right. He died a few weeks later. You know, he died a few weeks later. But as soon as Gregory brought his tap shoes over and he put them on, it was like time went back.
Yeah.
You know?
I just thought that was just such an amazing part of just like the sparkle. The sparkle came back.
Oh yeah, it did. It came right back in his eyes.
It did.
Yep.
I thought it was interesting that they wanted to do it, and the fact that there was so much passion to do it. They're like, we need to get Michael Jackson in. Michael's like, I'm not doing. And there's just like, it's for Sammy's like, I'm there. I love that.
Murphy, Sammy, Michael, Bill Cosby. Yeah, he got them all. The producer got them all. George Slatter.
I love it. I know that you're being sent a private chat. So if there's something else that came in, feel free to.
Private chat?
No. I mean, like, not all the questions are coming to me. They're being sent to you directly. So
yeah, that's why I've been answering them for you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how does one, I mean, you said as a documentary, you always try and find an angle on a story. But how do you initially choose the content to decide this may be something?
Sometimes someone chooses you, like in the case of American Masters, they chose me. Sometimes you choose it yourself. You come up with a subject or a project that you think is fascinating. So, for example, me and the producer of this film, MLK FBI, that came out this year, that was our initial idea. It was the producer's idea. We developed a proposal. We put together what we call a sizzle reel to excite people. We did some interviews.
Oh, I like that, a sizzle reel.
And we went out and raised the money. So Sammy Davis Jr. people came to me and they already had the money in place. Other projects, I have to raise the money. And sometimes you can do it in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, raise the money. So it depends. Sometimes I'm a director for hire. Sometimes I'm a director who initiates the project, And part of the challenge in this business is to always try to figure out how to keep the work coming and keep the project going, So, and I've been doing it 48 years now.
So you started when you were like 2 years old.
I know. I was 22 plus 2. I was 22.
Oh, that's great. And then on the side, you teach at NYU Tisch School.
New York University Tisch School of the Arts. I teach editing. I teach a class called the history of documentary. I teach production classes for students who go out and shoot their films. I teach a lot of stuff.
and you've been doing that for a number of years. Have you
27 years.
That's a number. That's a good number. Um, these students obviously are now 27 years different. And has have you seen, I mean, while you can see differences in films and whatnot, have you seen like a transformation or progression or a degression based on the students that are coming through? Like, have you seen any difference in students of just whether their brains are more keen on social issues or less social issues, or just the difference in teaching over the 27 years in your industry?
The one thing I've seen over the last 27 years with students is that from a technical perspective, they are better than I was at their age.
Mm,
You know, technically, they know how to shoot films better. They know how to edit films better. They really know technically how to really put together a film. Now, the challenge for all of these young people, like lots of film people going back hundreds of years, is how to construct and tell a good story,
mm.
be it in fiction or nonfiction. How do you tell a story that's going to be compelling and engaging and original? You know, and you know, sometimes every once in a while you'll have a student that will create something, you'll see, you say, wow, that's special. You know, but most times, like a lot of films and TV we see, most of it's mediocre.
Right.
But then there's some that just rise to the top. And there's some students like that. But the thing I've seen with the students over the last 15 years is that technically, they're much more accomplished than the students I had when I first started teaching back in 1994.
Could it be because of these mini computers that we all carry around?
Yeah, I mean, it is, because these students are just more technically and savvy in terms of computers, in terms of audio. They really, you know, and they watch movies. I mean, these kids watch movies. Now, I don't know that most of them don't know. They don't have what I call the history of movies like I do. I mean, they don't go back as far as I go back to, you know, D.W. Griffith or King Vidor or John Ford or Howard Hawks. They don't even know those filmmakers. Usually the earliest filmmakers they're aware of is Spielberg, George Lucas, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars.
Those are ancient.
For those young people now, for these generation now, those are ancient films, but that's those films that they know, you know. So if you go back, when I teach my history of editing class, I go back and show films from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And then one filmmaker from that period that still engages film students a lot is Alfred Hitchcock.
Mm.
His films have stood the test of time. There's something about the editing and the approach to his films, they still stand up. Where if I show a John Ford film or Howard Hawks films, most times these films fall on deaf ears.
Yeah. One question came up: the difference between a producer and an executive producer. Are there a number of producers, and then there's kind of one who just says yay, nay, or leads it?
Well, it can vary. Usually, the executive producer is the person who basically green lights the project. In the old Hollywood studio days, Darryl Zanuck, Louis B. Mayer, you know, Samuel Goldwyn, Jack Warner, they were executive producers at Warner Brothers, at Goldwyn Studios, at 20th Century Fox. And they greenlit projects with their board of directors. Oh, we want John Ford to do Grapes of Wrath. We want this director, Joe Mankiewicz, to do All About Eve. We want, you know, that's how they would do it. But nowadays in the world, an executive producer could be someone at a studio like a Warner Brothers or a Fox or a Paramount. But the executive producer could also be one who packages a project, who says, I want to do a film with George Clooney starring with Nicole Kidman, and I can bring in $60 million. That person becomes an executive producer. Or an executive producer could be a person who says, you know, I got this documentary I want to do about Martin Luther King, and you know, I'm going to give you $300,000 to start it up. I want to be an executive producer. You know, that's what they do. Now, a producer is the person who does the day-to-day operations of the film. Like if, you know, when I was doing the Sammy Davis film, I had a producer who was there to make sure the people I wanted to interview came to the location, you know, the places I wanted to shoot were set up. You know, when I needed footage, they would make sure I got the footage I needed, archival footage, you know. they would do the day-to-day nuts and bolts of making sure my production was on time and
Right.
on budget. You know, that's what a producer does.
I mean, in terms of the different roles that you've done between producer, executive producer, editor, and I think earlier when we were talking, you haven't necessarily done editing recently. Is there any one in particular, like, I really kind of like this one best because?
Oh, I like them all.
Okay.
I mean, when I was a young man, I would say to you from the age of 25 to 36, I was an editor. I
Mhm.
was very quiet, I was very shy, and I felt just most comfortable sitting in the editing room editing. You know, I didn't want to interact with people. But as you know, like a lot of human beings, my level of confidence started to grow. And by the time I got to 35, 36, I thought I can make films better than some of these directors and come in here with this material. Some of these producers, they don't know what they're doing. I know I can make it. And then I got an opportunity to be a director producer on this series, Eyes on the Prize too, about the civil rights movement. And
Mhm.
then and then Karen, I had a rude awakening. It wasn't so easy to be a director producer.
Oh,
It was a
but
rude
yet, but
awakening.
you kept going.
Oh, because ego kicked in, fear of failure and ego.
What made you get into this business in the first place?
Happenstance. I was majoring in marketing at Baruch College, part of the City University system, and I was in my junior year, and I was taking statistics and marketing classes, and I was absolutely miserable, Karen, miserable. And so one day I decided, let me go talk to my counselor because I need something after school. I need some kind of internship, something to take my mind off these classes because I'm not enjoying myself.
Yeah.
I had this dream that I wanted to be a businessman. You know, I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer when I was in high school, but that didn't pan out. But then I dovetailed off and wanted to be a businessman. So I went to see the counselor and wonderful African American lady whose name I can't remember. And I said I was looking for an internship. And so she said, well, what are your interests? And I said, I love books.
Mm.
I love reading. I love reading Richard Wright and Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Herman Melville and Zora Neale Hurston, And then I said, but ever since I was like 11, 12 years old, my family would every week buy the TV Guide. Remember the TV Guide, Karen?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
And I would go to the TV Guide with a pencil and I would circle all the films they would show on a show that they had on WOR Channel 9 called The $1 Million Movie.
Okay.
And I would circle the movies they would show because they would show one movie all week, all day, because they owned the RKO Studios vault. And in that vault, they had films like Out of the Past with Robert Mitchum, King Kong, Citizen Kane.
Mm.
So I would watch these films over and over again. Then I would watch on the other stations all these other films with commercials, like with Burt Lancaster and Ava Gardner and Kirk Douglas, and John Wayne. I was a big Western fan, Gary Cooper. And so I said, I like movies. So she says to me, the public television station, WNET, in 1968, after Dr. King's assassination, decided they wanted to get more people of color behind the camera, in the editing room, doing sound, producing. And they have a 1-year workshop, Sam, which is 2 nights a week from 6 to 10. You go in and professionals teach you how to make films and television. Are you interested? My response, Karen, was no.
Really?
I said,
Really?
I said, I love watching this stuff, but I don't care at all how they make it.
That's so funny.
But she was persuasive. And she persuaded me to go have a meeting. And I had a meeting with the lady who ran the program up on 57th Street and 8th Avenue. And I got accepted.
Huh?
And I did these classes for 1 year. And on the weekends, we would go out and shoot little films. 16 millimeter. We would shoot Lincoln Center. We would shoot stuff. And then one of us would be assigned to be the editor.
Uh-huh.
And I was assigned the editor on these projects. And that's where I felt most comfortable So by the end of the program, I was editing all the little films. Because they broke, it was like 15 of us working, and they broke us into little groups of 3 or 4. And I became the editor of all these little films I was working on. And so at the end of the program, they said they would try to find you a job. So they asked me what was my interest. I said, well, I'm trying to get a marketing degree at Baruch College. So I'd like to understand about how to get into film distribution, marketing films. But I said, but on the other hand, I'm also curious about maybe getting some kind of apprenticeship as an assistant apprentice editor. So summer of 1972, I was working at a marketing firm on Midtown, 34th Street and Park Avenue. And one day I called my apartment when I was living with my parents. My mother said, this production manager had called looking for me. They were looking for an apprentice editor on a low budget horror film. Most of the crew was Black, but the editor was Jewish, and he wanted a Black apprentice. So I went and had an interview with this editor named Victor Konevsky. And we talked, and he hired me as the apprentice. And I worked for 6 months on this low budget feature. All I did was splice trims together, sweep the edit room, get Victor tea. And then Victor, after the end of the 6 months, took me out to lunch. And he says to me, Karen, he says, Sam, you're a very nice young man. And I'm not sure you got much talent. But he says, I'm getting ready to do a documentary, which I didn't really know much about. And he says, I want to hire you. He says, you're not good enough to be an assistant editor yet. I'm going to make you my apprentice assistant. And I was making $50 a week. And he says, I'm going to give you a raise, Victor, Sam, $25. So I became his apprentice assistant for $75 a week. But I worked for him for 3 years, and I became his assistant editor.
Uh-huh.
And a couple of days a week, he would stop having me do my assistant's work. And after lunch, he'd make me sit behind him, and he would teach me all of his editing, everything about editing, how to select an interview, how to put the scene together, how to think about story and structure. Then he'd give me little scenes to edit, which he would then rip apart and say, this is terrible, Sam. How could you do this? This is awful. Re-edit this, Sam. You can't do this. This is not right. But by the time I was 25 years old, one of his clients who couldn't afford Victor for this little film about Mardi Gras in New Orleans hired me to edit. And I was so in awe of Victor Konevsky. I tried to cut my film, my first film, exactly the way he had showed me how he edited it. You know, my first 3 films, I tried to cut them like Victor Konevsky's films.
Nice. Nice. Did that counselor, did she ever see the outcome of her encouragement?
You know, I don't know, Karen, because I don't remember her name.
Oh, she probably now.
I don't remember who this lady was.
Well, it seems like we have this expression, beshert, which, you know, depending on some in the Jewish Hebrew way, it's more like soulmate, but in the Yiddish way, it's more like fate or destiny. It was fate. Destiny.
Yeah. This lady basically turned my whole life around.
And Victor, he seemed to like whip you into shape, huh?
He's still a friend, you know, he's 90 years old now.
Oh, fab.
Yeah,
oh, that'd be fun, having a documentary of you two talking, being like, do you remember when?
He's not in such great shape now, though.
Oh, that's
90 years old.
90,
I
90
still
years
talk
young.
to him. I still talk to him. Yeah, I talk to him every couple of weeks. He lives in Scarsdale.
Oh, so you have to come visit.
Yeah.
It's close. It's Westchester.
Yeah, he lives in Scarsdale.
But we will be dragging you up here at some point in time for something.
Sure.
I guarantee you that. One question came up. You know, you had said like Alfred Hitchcock had the lasting. What was the magic sauce of his editing or his filming that seemed to cover
tempo?
Oh.
His films are cut really fast, even today. He has a lot of edits in his films, and they keep you engaged. Great tempo. A lot of these films from the 30s and 40s, they usually did, you know, master shots, medium close up, not a lot of cutting, you know, because you're really more focused on story and dialogue. Hitchcock did storyboards where he would really storyboard every scene. And so he would have lots of cuts. You go back and watch North by Northwest, Rear Window, Vertigo, strangers on a train, lots of editing. And that's what keeps audiences engaged.
Or blood in the shower, one of the two.
Psycho. Yeah.
Are there any, are you working on anything now?
Always.
Always. How many things are you working on now?
3 or 4. You know, you ever remember that show? Your dad probably remembers this show called Have Gun Will Travel.
I do not, but
I
I'm
bet your
sure
dad
he
remembers
does.
that show. It was
Oh yeah,
Richard
there he
Boone.
goes. He's giving you the thumbs up.
Yeah, Richard Boone. Well, I always say half editor will travel, half producer editor will travel. You know, he was a gun for hire who would travel any place to help people.
Ah, so there
So,
you go. You're an editor. Your editor will travel. Your producer, director
exactly.
will travel.
I love making films, and I love as you can see, I love talking about films.
Well, it's, you know, and it's always the interesting thing. I would say in general, because you said you love books. Books are usually 9 times out of 10 better than the film.
Usually,
and that's
absolutely right.
Except for The Godfather. I will give the original Godfather, I will give equal footing on that one.
But some book, I mean, Great Gatsby is a better book than movies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which is
the movies have never been good. There's been 3 Great Gatsby movies, and none of them are any good.
None of them are good. There's also been about 17,000 Hong Kong movies, and probably the original was probably still the best.
Oh, King Kong. I mean, King Kong.
King Kong, not Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong. King Kong.
King Kong, the original, is the best.
Yeah, see, yeah. Sometimes sequels are not always the best.
So there was another question here about how did Sammy really feel about singing the Candyman? He hated that song, but that was his biggest commercial hit. So he sang it. He didn't like it, but he sang it.
Yeah, it was a crowd pleaser. He likes to please. Loves to please the crowds. Just and because it's so topical and it's so related in terms of things that we're working on in terms of community building. We're actually working on a Unity Against Hate March, and we're doing it with the Dutchess County African American Clergy Association, really to build relations. You know,
good.
I'm so fascinated by this Why We Hate series. I mean, we I think at some point we will be showing it because it's just such a topical topic. But what, you know, can you share with us? I mean, we haven't seen it, but just share a little bit of insight of what that was about and what you were trying to, what was the desired outcome?
Well, Spielberg had always wanted to do a series that looked at why do people hate each other so much? Why is there so much horror in the world? And he had found a company, he had put together some people to put together a huge proposal about the notion of good and evil, us against them. And he wanted to turn it into a series. And he reached out to Alex Gibney, a very well-respected documentary filmmaker, to sort of partner with to make it happen. So basically, Gibney reached out to me and another director, Geeta Ganderby, and asked us if we were interested in co-directing on this 6-part series that would look at the emotional and psychological reason why people do what they do in terms of hurting each other. And the series really covered so many different aspects. I mean, I went to South Africa to talk with the former prime minister, de Klerk, about, you know, the changes, the challenges they had when apartheid ended and Mandela came out of prison. I went to Israel, I went to Jerusalem, and I had a very intense day with both Palestinians and Israelis, not together, but separately. And you could feel the anger and the intensity between these two groups talking about each other. And I went down to, where's the community where the people say the missiles come from?
Where the
missiles?
Gaza.
Gaza. I went down to Gaza, interviewed some people down in Gaza, you know, so and then one of the director, Geeta, went to Colombia where there had been revolutions, you know, military guerrillas fighting against the country. We talked about the impact of soccer and how soccer makes people us against them, you know, and then we found experts who could talk about this. We went to Rwanda and talked about the genocide there. So it was really looking at how this notion of us against them can perpetuate Holocaust, can perpetuate, you know, Geeta went to which prison, which Holocaust prison?
Um,
in
Auschwitz.
Poland, Auschwitz. She went to Auschwitz. You know, so it was really looking at this notion of love and hate against all over the world. You know, and it was a pretty intense year that we spent shooting around the world. Very intense. You know, and a real challenge to try to understand what makes people do what they do. And they look at each other and how you can say this person's a cockroach and they should be smashed and killed, or this person should be gassed. I mean, intense. It was on Discovery Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, and that, it just, how,
You should get them. You should get them to send you the series. You can't show all of it in one night because it's all 6 hours, six 1 hour shows. So
okay. So I know Bradley's listening, so we'll put it on our magic list of things that we do.
Yeah, I went to Des Moines to interview the former neo-Nazi.
Yeah, that was part of the interview that
he turned himself around, you know, and I went to Philadelphia where he had grown up and how he had been sent to, when he was a young man, he was sent to an all-black school. And then he went down to this part of the town where he met his cousin had become a neo-Nazi and they shaved his head and he found a family. You know, it's a pretty intense series.
Yeah.
And Spielberg, very involved. We screened it in Los Angeles when it premiered for Spielberg and a bunch of people.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And it's, I hope more people see it and hear it and understand.
Oh, you should. It's important to see. Very, very important.
Yeah. It's there's way too much evil out there.
Oh man, it's frightening.
In your experiences, I mean, we see the statistics, we hear the stories. I mean, the rise of anti-Semitism just keeps skyrocketing, and it's disconcerting. So hopefully we're trying to find ways of communicating to build community, to build relations. So that way, once you have that understanding, hopefully that making it the other, the hate, doesn't automatically happen.
Kick in, exactly. Because we're all the same, really. We're all the same, but people have been taught, you grow up and you're taught to say, well, they're terrible people. Look at these people. They're awful people. They shouldn't exist. It's awful. I mean, and we see where America is at today. I mean, we just suffered through 4 years of a man who sowed dissension every step of the way. Division. Frightening. I never thought, that America would be at such a horrific place on so many levels in these last 5 years. It's frightening to me.
It's there's a lot of work cut out for all of us on building relations. If for you personally, the why we hate, how do you feel it impacted you?
For me, every one of these films I do, Karen, it forces me to sort of take a look inside my own self about how I respond to people, how I act to people, the kind of respect that you want to be able to give to people and you want to have, and vice versa. So working on that series was like, you learn things. You just learn about people. You learn about people's sensitivity. You learn about what makes people tick. I mean, I swear to you, when I sat in that room in Jerusalem and we first interviewed the 6 Palestinians, and their perspectives were diametrically opposed to those who were Israelis. When the Israelis came in, and I even had one of the ladies, Israelis, tell me that she thought I was anti-Semitic, because I challenged the fact. I said, don't you think that sometimes when you went to Gaza, you had used too much force? And that was like, how could you say that? So it's the world's intense, even in South Africa, which I had been to like 5 times before, you still see that friction between whites and blacks,
Yeah.
It's a tricky world we live in. It's a tricky world.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I mean, and you look at every place. I mean, it's like, I was listening to the president from Belarus yesterday, talking about the protesters, and he was saying they hurt themselves. Nobody beat them.
they tripped and hit the door.
Yeah, they fell on the ground, you know, I mean, this is all
Not funny.
fake. This is
Right.
all fake news. I mean, come on. I mean, it's like when people have the audacity to say that January 6th, that wasn't anybody trying to take over the Congress. That was just, those were tourists. Or say it wasn't our people, it was the FBI, it was Antifa. I mean, this kind of craziness is like amazing to me. I used to think nothing can amaze me anymore in the world because I've been around so long, but I've been amazed in a frightening way.
In a frightening way. Yeah, my hope is that people will start listening to each other. Like that, I mean, because if people just keep getting insular, then they're only listening to their own circles, and it just is very skewed. So
that's exactly right. And you got to keep your ears open.
Yes. And we got to keep watching more films and documentaries and whatever the three things you're working on. We want more from you.
Well, I'm working on one now that you'll find interesting about the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. You remember that?
I was young, but yes.
Yeah, I just came back from Des Moines, Iowa last week, where I interviewed a lady who was only one of two women who was held for a whole 444 days by the Iranian students. There was only two women held. Wow. All the other women were let go because they were secretariat. These two women had positions of power.
Oh.
444 days she was in held hostage by the Iranian students.
That'd be really interesting insight of just, I can't imagine the trauma that she.
Well, she was a very strong Episcopalian. No, she's a Lutheran.
Okay.
And her faith really, from the way she was answering these questions, got her through. Her faith. Amazing.
Yes. Hopefully that won't repeat itself. Hopefully we won't ever be in that situation again.
Well, Iranians still have some American hostages now. Former Iranians who became Iranian Americans some of their parents went back
for some reason, and then they captured them and caught them, and they said, wait, why, what happened? It's like, I'm American. It's like, nope, it doesn't matter. You're
that's right.
Wow. I know it's already 8 o'clock, but I'll throw one more question. What question do you wish you were asked today?
No, I don't know. I mean, everybody asks me lots of questions. I've been asked lots of questions in the last 5-6 years. I don't think there's one question I haven't been asked. I don't know.
Yeah, no, nothing.
No, I mean, how was it with your mother?
Well, we're not going to ask you what is your favorite Jewish food, so don't worry about that one.
Okay.
But no, we do thank you for taking the time with, what is it? Hummus?
Yeah.
There you go. You have a conversation. It's like, where's hummus really from? You can have 17 different types.
I know.
Yeah, so then you'll have to come join our very Israeli Rosh Hashanah cooking class that we're going to be doing on the 1st. So I'll send you the information. You can learn how to make some other good Israeli cuisine.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of really good Israeli friends.
Excellent.
Who are filmmakers also. Really good, close friends.
Oh, well, tell them, to send us some trailers so we can share.
I will. She's a wonderful filmmaker.
Excellent.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I hope people got some wisdom or something from me tonight.
Well, I think so. And just so last week, tell us a little bit about your most recent, because you were not able to join us because you're like, I got another award. What was that last award that you got? I was trying to look it up.
When was it? Was last?
That was a week ago, Thursday, the July, what was it, 28th, the UGFVA award.
Oh yeah, it's this film organizations for universities, and they gave me a filmmaker who I knew personally because he was one of my colleagues in NYU named George Stoney, who passed away a few years back. They give out what they call annually the George Stoney Award.
Okay.
And they gave me the George Stoney Award.
Aw.
And I had forgotten that they would have the ceremony that night.
Well, I will say selfishly, I'm happy for you that you got it, and even happier that we got you tonight for more of an extended discussion about all the great things you're doing.
My
So
pleasure, my pleasure. Please stay in touch.
absolutely will.